Welcome to the Agile MSP Service Delivery with Kanban webinar. Today's presenter is Matt Fox. Please note that all lines are in listen-only mode. This means that after joining today's presentation, your line will automatically be muted. We welcome any questions at any time during today's presentation. Please enter your questions into the questions box in your webinar console. At the conclusion of today's event, our speaker will be holding a Q&A session. And with that, let's get started. Matt, take it away.
Hi. All right. Glad you can hear me this time. Welcome. We're really glad you're here. Yeah, if you can't hear me right now, just toss something in the questions box there. Yeah, we're really glad you're here. Thanks for sticking around. So today we're going to talk about how to take back control of your service work in your MSP using agile techniques, especially Kanban. Actually, we are an MSP, and we know what you're feeling, and we've been we're going to give you a framework to deliver your service quickly and efficiently, making your customers happy and meeting your SLAs with the team you have today. So one thing I want to do is I'd like you to find the questions section in your webinar, and just so we can kind of see who's here and what regions we have represented, if you could type your name, the company that you're with, and your location. I'd love to see that. We can see how many regions we have here, and yeah, read that out. We'll get to know each other, see who's here. While you're doing that, I want to introduce a little bit more about myself and Top Left. So Top Left, as I mentioned, we're a unit of an MSP. It is Kerkhoff Technologies in the Vancouver, British Columbia area since 2007. It's an established MSP. I'm heading up the Kanban division here. I've been with KTI and some associated companies since 2010, and I spent the last 10 years involved in IT projects and service in a whole variety of contexts, including running support for a network SD-WAN product, participating in service work and triage at KTI. So today we're going to be teaching what we've learned from a bit of study and a lot of practice here at KTI. Now, if you came for the project webinar last month, welcome back. Just sit tight while I introduce some Kanban basics, because that part will be quick, and then we'll get into some new content directed specifically at the service delivery. Oh, great. Okay, so this time I am seeing your answers come in. I wondered why I hadn't seen anybody say where they're from. Let me read out here. Who do we got here? So we have Brian from Vermont. Welcome. We got Robert Martinez with Palmer Technology Solutions in Technis. Welcome. Welcome, Robert. Sean from Dedicated IT in Wellington, Florida. John at Innovative Solutions in Rochester. John from Phoenix. Welcome. Sam from Big Sur Technologies in Tampa, John K in San Jose, welcome. Tom in Chicago, we got Melanie from Technology Associates in North Carolina, welcome. Andy from Allegiant Technology in Overland Park, welcome. And Keith in Denver, super, yeah, appreciate y'all putting that in there. Stephen from NetSurit in New York City, and Keith from Digital 323 Denver. Welcome, welcome, Keith. Appreciate that. See some existing customers in there and some new folks. Really appreciate you all coming. Okay, yeah. So let me tell you a little bit about what was happening with us at KTI. So this is us, our team. Picture taken before March, as you'd probably guess. Yeah, so this is us, our MSP, and let me explain what we were doing with our service delivery and what the problem was. So there are two kind of main models, I would say the common models that MSPs use for managing their service delivery, and both of them have some bad problems. So ours was what I call the free-for-all mode. So that would be, suppose if you, it's kind of where technicians are really allowed to just do whatever they see fit in terms of getting work done, where they might take work off of the queue themselves, or maybe they get it assigned. But after it's assigned, it's really up to them to just do whatever they need to do to get that done. And it works okay at the beginning, but it tends to end up usually with something like this. So if you were to track the progression of a ticket from new to completed, it would look something like this. Here we go, new, in progress, waiting status, in progress, waiting, done yet, and so on. Basically, it's going through a whole bunch of different statuses. It's not really moving directly from new to completed. and that causes some problems. So the problems for us was that we had a lot of tickets started but not finished. In fact, we had like some 400 tickets or more with 10 technicians. They were overwhelmed, lots to do, but they didn't know what was important. Took a long time to close tickets. The technicians were cherry picking tickets. Those tickets nobody wants to do, they get ignored. Customers felt neglected. They realized, if they were the squeaky wheel, they'd get the grease, and we didn't have enough teamwork happening. So that was our model, and I'm sure some of you have experienced that model. You're probably using it right now, which might be why you're here. The other one is kind of all the way on the other side of the spectrum. It's not the spectrum of how much structure you have, where free-for-all is very little structure. The other one is, I call that the Tetris method, and it's way too much structure, actually. So you all know the game of Tetris. You figure out where a block can be placed as it comes down from the top of the screen. You fit all the blocks in so they fit just right. Then the lines disappear. You get more space to work. So basically, the reason I call this model is Tetris is because this is where the dispatcher takes every single ticket that comes in. They kind of estimate how long it will take to do. They find a tech to do the work. They find a free slot in the technician's calendar where he or she, where the dispatcher can schedule that work. And so it's really kind of like a game of Tetris in that way, where they got to fit everything in just right with the minimum of gaps. And if you screw up, it can really affect you for a long time. This is what ConnectWise calls paint your calendar green, or my life is my calendar, if you've heard those terms. That's kind of what that means there. So what's wrong with this? Well, it's a lot of work and it doesn't add any value for the customer, and it's really fragile. So more on if it's a lot of work, especially when things don't go exactly as planned. So basically the dispatcher needs to estimate the time that ticket's going to take. And then put it into the technician's calendar, and that requires the calendars to be accurate and complete, and that can be a lot of work to keep that always up to date. It doesn't add any value. What I mean there is that sometimes for a lot of types of work, the customer doesn't actually care what time of day the work gets done, and so putting it into the calendar just as a way of managing the work really doesn't make the customer happy. They don't need that. So it's just some extra process. And if we could get rid of that, we'd be more efficient. And one of the worst things about it is that it's really fragile. So your day ends up really, really tightly wound. Like one little hiccup, something takes a bit longer than you expect, and everything unravels. It could be that a ticket goes over the allotted time, which, as we know, happens all the time. Or maybe the member availability changes, or they're sick, personal errand, or something that wasn't in the calendar. So typically, to handle when things don't go according to plan, one of these two things is done. Either the tech, for example, if the tech is coming to the end of the half hour or the hour or however long it was that dispatcher put it in the calendar for, if they're still working on that ticket, then they just continue to work on it. Basically, they go past how long the calendar says they should work on that ticket. So that means that tickets later in the day need to be rescheduled, and that can be a lot of work potentially for the dispatcher and also for the engineer to handle that, because a lot of tickets might need to be rescheduled, not just the one right after it, but all of the ones after it. Or sometimes the tech, if they're come to the end of the time that the calendar says they can work on it, they actually stop. They do what the calendar says and they stop working on that ticket, but that leaves an unfinished ticket. And it could be that they're most of the way done with that ticket, but they just leave it unfinished because the calendar said to, and that can kind of snowball until they have a lot of unfinished tickets. Tickets where you're 80% done. And that doesn't really give the customer a great experience, because the customer experiences all of the value when the ticket is 100% done. And, the customer is not 80% satisfied when the ticket's 80% done. They get all the value when it's totally done. And even when they, obey the calendar, then that ticket needs to be rescheduled. So it's still a lot of work. So Tetris is a fun game, but it's not for managing your work. Now, just to be clear, some work does always need to be in the calendar, things that are coordinated with others, on-site visits, scheduled outages, and things like that. But that's usually a minority of the work for most MSP technicians, except maybe those who, the road warriors who are always going on site. So the majority of that work is usually not, doesn't have to be in the calendar. Anyway, so back to KTI. So we had all this trouble despite the fact that we were using a major PSA. We were using ConnectWise, right? And the tickets had enough data. They had the summary, description, notes, time entries, and so on. But the free-for-all method leads to bad service, and the Tetris mode makes everyone stressed and can't handle the changes. And we hear the exact same complaints from Autotask users as well as ConnectWise users. So we knew of Kanban and agile techniques from some experience we had with software development, as we decided to try it in our service delivery. You know what? We found out it works. We've made major improvements. Now, even though we're all still busy, we feel much more under control. We understand our own work, and overall, our customers are happy. So I'm gonna show you here how to use Kanban to get the right balance of structure and flexibility to manage the service in your MSP. After that, only if you want to stick around, I'm going to show you the tools that we have built and now we offer to other MSPs to make it all fast and easy. And I'll take some questions. Anything about service delivery, anything about our Kanban tool, you can start now. You can type the questions into the tool and we'll get to them at the end. So let's take a quick look here at what is Kanban. Well, you might recognize this if you've ever used any sort of tool or even just sticky notes on a whiteboard. Kanban doesn't have to be complicated. Basically, the idea is that you make columns for the key stages of your work. Work starts out at the left. As it moves through the key stages, it moves along the columns towards the right. And when tickets are as far as they can get to the right, then that's when they're done. Each card here, sticky note or ticket in your system represents some work. And so it's very easy to visualize exactly what stage each part of your work is at, whether it's done or you're doing it now or it's still to do. So it's easy to visualize. And there's a few other ways that you can arrange it to make things clear as well. A lot of people are just hearing about it now, especially in the IT space, but actually it goes back a long ways. It came out of Toyota automobile manufacturing in the 1940s as a set of ideas having to do with thinking about efficiency and reducing waste, and especially representing the work visually. In fact, that's what Kanban means. Can means visual, and ban, it means card. It has to do with looking more at managing the work and not the workers quite so much. Another term is pull versus push, which kind of reflects in Kanban, the engineers choose when they're ready to take on more work instead of dispatchers choosing exactly what they should work on, which is kind of pushing work to the engineers. In IT space, it's more of the engineers see what work needs to be done and they decide when they're able to start on new work. It has been quite widely adopted in software development over the last 10 or 20 years, and now it's becoming known in many other industries, IT and others. In fact, you may have, if you've heard of Trello, it's probably the most well-known Kanban sort of application. Atlassian acquired them for big bucks, $425 million back in 2017. You may have heard of Asana as a project management and team communication tool. They just went public or started the process to go public just in February this year. So there's a lot of activity going on. Here are some of the benefits. You can see the work in progress. And then so when you can see it, then you can limit it. I'll get into why that's important more later. You can be more responsive as a team when you have less work in progress. You can stop work from falling through the cracks because it's really easy to visualize how long each ticket that you've started, how long has it been since someone touched it? Like, are we forgetting about this work? It can improve your flow of work by identifying and addressing certain bottlenecks you might have in your team. The most common bottleneck is that you have some certain one or two people in your team who get consulted on a large amount of that work. And so they become the bottlenecks for your team. You can stop feeling overwhelmed when you can lay out what you're doing in a visual way. And it makes it very easy to, much easier to communicate clearly with your team because actually everybody looks at the exact same representation of the data. So it makes it really easy to communicate. And Kanban is something you can adopt with small manageable changes. You don't have to do it all at once. It's not like you got to send your whole team to a big conference to learn how to do this or take a week to rebuild your systems. You can start small and build up as you go. So let's talk about some of the, how do we actually do this? So this is kind of the, getting into actually learning about this and adopting it. So there are going to be 3 decisions that you're going to need to make as you adopt Kanban for service delivery. So the first of those is you're going to need to identify the key stages of your service pipeline. So think of that sort of, what if you kind of pretended that your pipeline of work of tickets as they come in and engineers work on them. What if it was a factory floor and you kind of imagined the widgets being constructed in this factory? That's your work, and there's different workstations that these widgets move between as they get, first they start being built, and every workstation they go to, something new is added to them. They get a little bit more closer to being done until eventually they go to the shipping and they're sent out. So what if your service pipeline was like that? What would be the key? What would be those workstations? What would be the key stages there? I have some examples in just a moment. The second decision is we're going to need to adapt our triage method. Now, if you have a good triage method already, you may be able to keep most of it. It is important to have a good triage process in Kanban. So it could mean that if you don't have much right now, you might need to build that out a little bit. It doesn't need to be anything complicated, but we do need to know what's important about that. And the third one is we're going to select the dispatch method, meaning how does that work actually get distributed to the engineers so that they know what's most important for them to be working on. So we'll talk more about that. So a little bit more about the service pipeline stages. Here are some pretty typical examples. And these actually correspond, like these are your ticket statuses out of your PSA, ConnectWise or Autotask or whatever else you might be using. New, that we all know that. That's when it's been submitted by the customer. New from the email, connector, portal, phone, whatever. Ready, typically that would be when it's ready for starting. This is new work. It's ready for an engineer to claim this, to work on this. Started or in progress. These are things that engineers have already started, or actually that they could work if they so chose. It's not as much for showing what's being worked on at this very moment, because that's actually not that useful. What's more important is to reflect the work that you've already got some investment. You've already done some work on it. The engineer has already done some work on it. Basically, have they made a time entry? That is going to be your work in progress, and that has a huge impact on how fast you can turn around tickets. So, like suppose that an engineer has only has started one ticket that they haven't completed now. You're going to be a lot more responsive to new work that comes in compared to somebody who maybe has 5 or 10 or 15 tickets that they've already started to put some time on it, and that is in their court to finish. Now, if you do really want to track the stuff that's actually in progress at this very moment, then you can always set up a separate status for that kind of work, or on a Kanban board, have it on its own column. Another status is waiting. Okay, that's where it's waiting outside the team to do something before this can continue. Frequently getting information from the customer, the vendor needs to do something. You're waiting for a part in the mail or something like that. Scheduled means that the next action on this ticket is scheduled in the calendar because it does require coordination with another party, frequently because you're going on site and you said you're going to be there at 3 or whatever. There's a scheduled outage or something like that. Review is kind of it's a good step. Not a lot of MSPs use it, but that would be if you have something like a peer review stage or a customer acceptance stage or some workflow like that where you have a very clear way to confirm that this was done properly. And finally, completed. It's all done as far as the tech team is concerned. So, and I should say, yeah, you may have other statuses as well, especially if you have very specific workflows. Like for example, if you think about your procurement workflow, you might have stages that are specific just to that. A stage in the procurement workflow could be you're waiting for the invoice. That's very specialized. So you can have other stages like that as well. And on a Kanban board, it might just look something like this. We'd lay out the statuses like that, roughly, from on the left side of the board is the new side. Then as a ticket moves through these stages, it'll get eventually to completed. So you can tell just by glancing at the board, where's the bulk of your work? Is it in ready, waiting, scheduled, started, and so on. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the triage method. So this is where you either have an individual, doesn't necessarily actually have to be a specific person. It could be a role that's taken on, maybe rotated through the team or whatever, but basically either you have somebody doing a check on tickets when they come in to make sure that they're a good ticket and that an engineer can actually start to work on this. Or possibly you have engineers self-assign tickets. So like I mentioned, if you have a good triage process already, then you may be done this already. You might not need to make any changes. Or this could be a good opportunity to build out the triage process for the first time. Basically, this is what you need to do when you move a ticket from new to ready. It provides a good chance to check on the ticket, review it to make sure it has all the necessary information. You can identify emergency tickets that do need to interrupt other work, things that need to be worked on right now. And you're just gonna make sure that it's got, good ticket data. It's got the right company, it's got the right contact, priority, SLA, categorization, maybe needs a configuration set on it, and stuff like that. You might also want to set realistic budget estimated hours as kind of a limit for the technicians. Not like it's not for the purpose of like fitting it into the calendar. It's just kind of an indication on when the engineer, how much time should an engineer put into this ticket at the most before they come back and talk to somebody and say, yeah, like, do we need to review this? Maybe there's a different way to work on this ticket. You might have one new step in your triage process. It could be the ordering of tickets in the ready column. So we'll get more about that in later. You could also have a method where technicians do take tickets straight from the new column, but that's only for small and really, really disciplined teams because there's always a possibility that you end up with the free-for-all method there. So you got to be careful with that. In a small team, perhaps they can just take tickets out of the new status. And as I mentioned, you don't need to have a dedicated team member for this. It can be a role, and you rotate through your engineers doing this daily or weekly or whatever works for you. Okay, so the third decision that you need to make, and this is kind of the most interesting one actually, is that you need to figure out your dispatch method. And I want to emphasize that this is an important decision, but it's not necessarily a permanent decision. Okay, you can decide on your method, and then you can change it later. It's not like you're getting married to this. You can change this later. So your two choices here are between a technician queue, or basically having multiple queues, or having just a single queue, basically one queue of work for your whole team. So you're actually already familiar with how this all works because I'm assuming you've all gone shopping in different types of stores. So you might recognize this from the checkout at a store. A lot of grocery stores will have this sort of method for their checkout. So when you consider yourself, when you want to check out, you are a unit of work. Very frequently, you will go and you'll kind of choose for yourself, kind of assign yourself to one particular checkout lane, which has one person, and they're working through that checkout lane. They're always servicing one person at a time, and after that, they have a queue of people waiting to be serviced, and each individual checkout lane has its own queue. Generally, if you get into one queue, you're probably going to stay there for the whole time until it's your turn to be serviced. There are other ways to do it, though. More and more, we're seeing, at least where I live, we see the type of checkout where each checkout lane only services one person at a time, but the queue of work is just a single one. And so you line up, you don't have to make a choice. You just line up in the line, you get in your position in the queue, and there's always somebody coming off the front of the queue here because every time one of the checkout lanes clears, they're done, then the first person goes over to whoever is free. And that's actually, that's a good way to visualize it. And that's actually very, very similar to how things can work in your team. So this is the main decision that you need to make. Which way do you want to work in your team? Now, each one has a few, their own advantages and disadvantages. So the advantage for the technician queue method is that it doesn't require uniform training. And that's kind of one of the disadvantages of the team queue, is that if you're going to have just a single queue, then almost any member of your team needs to be able to take on any of the work that can end up in that queue. And you may have a mix of junior and senior folks, or people who are more familiar with certain technologies or certain customers certain projects or something like that, which means that not everybody can take any of the work that might end up in that queue. If you now, as a good practice, you do want to address that. You do want everybody in your team to be able to take on any project, work from any project, from any customer, from any particular technology, but we know that that can take a while to get to that sort of best practice. So the technician queue doesn't require you to do that, because if work comes in and only one person can work on it, well, then it gets assigned to that technician who knows what to do. The team queue has more advantages in terms of service delivery. It's more responsive because new work can, basically tickets can start when any technician becomes free. It doesn't have to wait for one specific technician to become free. Also, it's more efficient because it actually reduces the amount of work that needs to be done. You don't need to assign work to a member. So that's a thing that you don't need to do anymore. It can save a lot of time. Also, you don't need to monitor those queues on an ongoing basis to see if one engineer has gotten kind of stalled on something and it's delaying everything in his or her queue. We don't need to monitor that because that's not a problem that happens anymore. So overall, the team queue is better. If you can do it, the team queue is best. I mean, in real world life though, the technician queue can be a lot easier to start with. I wanted to mention though, the hybrid method is possible. You can actually combine these if you need to. So what I mean there is that if a ticket comes in and it is one of these specialized things that only one or two people on your team can work on, then go ahead and assign that to the engineers who can do that. But if it's a simpler thing and anybody on your team can do that work, then don't assign it. Leave that work unassigned, and that will be claimed by one of the engineers who becomes free and doesn't have anything else assigned to them. And this also kind of relates to support tiers as well. Level 1, level 2, level 3, things like that. So if you have a good tier method already, then you might have already solved this problem. It's just kind of a different take on sort of the same thing. So overall, like just a general recommendation, if you don't necessarily see that one or the other of these is more applicable to your team right now, most people can get a good start just by going with the technician queue now, and then eventually move towards the hybrid mode, and then to the team dispatch method later. It could be that the technician queue is already kind of similar to what you're doing, and in fact it probably is similar to what you're doing if you're doing the Tetris method, the paint your day green sort of dispatch method, because then you are already assigning work to members. So the only difference that we're going to do, and I'll explain more about how we do this in just a minute, you're already assigning that work to the members. All you're going to do is manage it with a Kanban board, not in the calendar. So that would be a natural thing to do if you're already doing the calendar mode. So let's take a look about how does this actually look on a Kanban board, depending on which choice you make here. So if you are going to choose the technician queues method, then the board is going to look a bit like this. You're going to have a lane here, a lane for unassigned work, and a lane for all of your members in your team. So it could be 2 people, it could be 10 people. Depending on how big your team is. So when work needs to be triaged, it's going to be over here, obviously unassigned, and then the dispatcher is going to decide, okay, let's get these tickets assigned to somebody. Going to take it and put it, see what's the nature of the ticket, who's got a lot of work going on or who doesn't have much work going on, and choose the best person to work on that ticket and stick it in that person's lane in their ready column. And also order it so that the next ticket to work on is at the top, and then the order continues after that. So that's how it would look with the technician queue. Now, if you're doing the team queue method, then it's going to look like this. In the ready column, we don't assign work to any of our members, Alice or Bob here. Those are empty. But we are going to have the list of unassigned work over here already in the ready column, and they're going to be ordered here by what's most important. And so then, when one of the members is ready to take on new work, they come to the unassigned lane, the ready column, and take what's at the top. And so that's it, actually. Those are the three decisions that you need to make before you start. What are the statuses or stages in your pipeline? Those have to do with the columns that you're going to see. And then how do you do triage? Basically, how do you get those tickets from new to ready? What needs to be done on them to make that move? And how do you assign work to the members, team queue or technician queue? And then you get to execute on all this. And I'll explain how that's all going to work. Well, we've already seen how tickets would get from the new to the ready column and get assigned. And now let's talk about how do the technicians actually do their work? What does the technician workflow look like here? So as we've discussed, the work is moving on the board from left to right. The tickets move in that direction. The engineers actually, they focus in the opposite direction. They are going to kind of be focusing first on what's most on the right side of the board. The reason we do that is because that's the stuff that's already closest to being complete. So frequently that would be your started or your in progress column, because it could be that anything that's already started in progress. It could be that maybe there's just 5 more minutes of work to do on that, 10 more minutes or whatever, and then the next step is going to be that ticket is done. So it's best to work on those things in order to minimize the number of tickets that you've already started. So that's why you're going to focus on what's most to the right side of the board. And when there's not tickets on available to work on the furthest right side of the board, then you move column by column, right to left, looking for new work to do. Eventually, if there's nothing to do, then you'll get to the ready column and you can pick off new work to do. And because the dispatcher has ordered the tickets in the ready column, whether that's your technician queue and they're actually looking in their own lane for the ordered tickets in the ready column, then they pick from their own lane, but they still pick from the top because they've been ordered by the dispatcher. Or you're using the team queue and they don't look in their own lane, they look in the common queue. They still look at the top because there the tickets have been ordered. Yeah, so pretty straightforward. We see the work move from left to right, and the engineers, they work from right to left. And I'll emphasize that this is probably the key thing. So if you remember one thing from this whole webinar, then remember this, because this is what's going to result in having a really responsive team and avoiding the case that we had where we had 400 open tickets with only 10 technicians, is emphasizing finishing work rather than starting it. So suppose Alice starts her day. There's 2 tickets that she could work on here. They're already in her started column or in progress because she was working on them yesterday. Alice should really avoid starting anything else. Like looking through waiting for things that might be ready to work now, or especially taking work from the ready column. She should really avoid that because she's already got 2 things that are in her court to finish. She should focus on these. And sometimes that just takes some discipline, because maybe these are things that, she's not really into this type of work, or, we all know there could be 100 reasons that she'd really rather start something from the ready column, start something fresh. We always like to work on new things, right? But it's going to take some discipline. But Kanban, this is how Kanban helps, is by making this really obvious in a visual way. What Alice has already started, and she can finish these off. And once those are done, then absolutely check if there's any, well, you don't have to worry about scheduled because that just kind of comes in the calendar. Take a quick look through ready. We're working from right to left. So just take a quick look through waiting, see if there's anything that's opened up there. Maybe the customer's responded or whatever. It means you can work on it again. So prefer that and move that to in started, in progress or started. And if there's nothing in waiting, then absolutely go ahead and take from the ready column. In fact, that's what Bob can do here, because Bob has nothing in started right now. So he would first look through waiting and then look through the ready column. Well, just pick what's at the top of the ready column. And that's basically the engineer's workflow, and that's what keeps your work in progress to a minimum and gives you, makes you seem really responsive to your customers. I do want to mention too that technicians are still going to observe their calendars. because they're going to have some meetings in there. They are going to have some tickets that are scheduled because they need to do them at a certain time of day. And so they're going to keep an eye on their calendars. Basically, they're working through their Kanban board anytime that there's not something in their calendars. Now, actually, that's going to be the majority of the time. The meetings and the scheduled tickets should be the minority of their time. So they are going to have the bulk of their week, like 75% of their week at least, I would say, is going to be unscheduled, meaning that's when they're working through their Kanban board. One little note is that sometimes waiting tickets, meaning waiting for information from the customer, from a vendor or whatever, it really depends on the team, but some teams like to not make waiting for those responses the responsibility of their engineers. Other teams say, once this ticket is yours, it's going to stay assigned to you. Some teams say when it's waiting for somebody else, and that can be the dispatcher or the service manager's job, or assigned to some role, and that's fine. Either way you do that is fine. Just make sure that it's really clear whose responsibility it is to be waiting for that response. So if it's assigned to the engineer, then it's going to stay in their swim lane, and they're going to monitor that. If it's the responsibility of somebody else, the dispatcher or service manager, to watch that, then assign that to their role. Assign that to them so that they can watch that. Just make sure that what is in your Kanban board matches the reality of what you expect in your team, so that everybody is clear on that. So as a dispatcher or a service manager, there is a role to monitor this work. To make sure that things are going according to the plan, and to take action when things aren't. So here are some of the things that you're going to be watching for this work on your Kanban board. So you're going to be watching if there's a due date on the card. You would write that on, if you're using sticky notes on a wall, you're going to write that on the card. So you're going to watch for the due date versus how much progress are we actually making on this ticket. We're going to be looking at how many hours are logged versus whatever was budgeted or estimated at the beginning. You want to be aware of when that goes over budget, or when it's starting to approach the budget. You can write that on the cards too. You're going to especially be watching for things that have been in the column for a long period of time. Now, what you might define as long really depends on the column. Things that have been in the started or in progress column, you probably don't want to see things there for more than 2, maybe 3 days. Whereas if it's in the waiting column, you could be fine if it's been there for 10 or like 14 days. So there's not one amount of time that applies to the entire board. It's really per column. But you do want to watch for that, because you want to be aware when things have possibly gotten forgotten about, or someone's just too busy and some of this work is just being neglected because an engineer is too busy. You're also going to, similarly, you're going to watch for a long time without a time entry or note, because that's also an indicator that work is not actually being done on that ticket. You're going to watch for bottlenecks. Like I mentioned, the main bottleneck you're going to watch for is looking at your members in their lanes to see who has too much work, to see if it's not distributed evenly in your team. Because if somebody is kind of delaying, just too busy, so that a substantial amount of work in your team is getting delayed because it's all depending on this one person who's just too busy, that's a big problem. And as a manager, you need to figure out ways to address that, possibly by moving some of that work over to other people, which might include getting them trained up on it so that they can do more. Maybe building out a library of standard operating procedures, something like that, so you can distribute that work more evenly and reduce the load on that one or two, the senior people in your team. Some of the ways to resolve that, like I mentioned here, swarming, it's kind of an agile term. You're just gonna, maybe it's something that you can probably get this done if you just assign 3 more people to work on it all together, for 15 minutes, and you can probably just get it done. That can be a technique. Like I mentioned, reassigning work to move to a new engineer, especially when it's assigned right now to an engineer who's the bottleneck, who's just too busy. You might, if someone is too busy, maybe don't assign them any new work for a while, so they get a chance to work down that large queue of work that they've ended up with. You might reprioritize the tickets, change the ranking of the tickets, especially if a certain ticket has maybe it has a due date coming up or an SLA coming due, but it hasn't been started yet. You might need to move that closer to the top of the prioritized list so that someone starts working on it sooner so that you can meet that SLA or that due date. Sometimes engineers just need to be reminded to follow up. Hey, point out that they have, there's been a ticket that hasn't had any changes in 3 days, but it's still in their court. Just give them a reminder. Or sometimes you can split up a ticket, especially if it was too big at the beginning. Sometimes you might find out that maybe 80% of the work is done on a ticket and it's just waiting for that last 20% for some reason. It's fine in that case to split that work up into 2 tickets, one representing the work that's already done, and you can just clear that ticket totally out, and then one representing the work that hasn't started yet. And then it can just kind of go back into your queue to do the smaller part of that work. And yeah, so that actually kind of concludes the bulk of talking about how Kanban can be used in service delivery. And if remember this, work on a Kanban board moves from the left to the right. The workers focus on the right to the left. This review, how does this compare to the kind of the free-for-all mode? It's enough structure to prevent getting a lot of work in progress and work falling through the cracks, because those are the tendencies for the free-for-all method, because there's not enough structure there. Compared to the Tetris method or the calendar dispatch, which is too much structure, it's a lot more flexible. So when things don't go according to the plan, you don't have to bother rescheduling work. Everything is still in its order. You just get to it when you get to it, depending on when it's fine. So it takes a little longer to get to it, but that would have happened anyway, even if you were using the calendar. When urgent work comes in, it's more flexible because that urgent work can go right to the top of the queue. You don't have to worry about rescheduling anything. And you still have just as much control over the ordering of the work as when you do use the calendar to dispatch work, because that's part of the process. The dispatcher orders the work and the engineers work from the top of the list. So then just want to warn you though, if you can do all of this stuff with any sort of Kanban board. You can use Kanban software, but then you might be double entering data, and you probably have better things to do than that. Or you could try it on a physical Kanban board with sticky notes on the wall or anything like that, but same thing, you're still double entering the data in that case, and it's pretty hard to do if you're working remote, as I know a lot of us still are. Managing it just in your PSA, well, you don't get that visibility, and that's probably why you're here, is to learn about new ways to make that sort of thing visible. Even in your PSA, it's a lot of clicks. To do anything useful, sometimes it's hard to monitor for bottlenecks or neglected work. And a lot of people are kind of looking at different views of the data, so it makes it harder to communicate about that. So that's why I wanted to show you now a little bit about what our software can actually do to make this a lot easier. So you can use the Kanban boards that we've built for ConnectWise, and it integrates with Autotask. It's kind of the best of everything. You get the boards for the visualization, you get the easy management, you can identify the bottlenecks and the neglected work, and you don't waste time entering data because everything comes straight out of your PSA. In fact, it can show you useful stuff immediately because once you connect it, all the data is already there by your tickets and whatnot. Also, another point is that it's very useful when your team is remote, because everybody, it's just web-based. Everybody brings it up on their own computers. Real easy. So let me show you a little bit about this. This is an example of a Kanban board from top left. So all this data, all these tickets here that you see are synced with ConnectWise or Autotask. All we need is some API account credentials. The columns here are mapped to the statuses of your tickets or project tasks. You can drag and drop to move them between the columns. So for example, an engineer might come here to the ready column, see what's at the top, click and drag, pull it over to in progress. Just drag and drop, super easy. You can drag and drop to reorder within the columns too, to set the rank there, to communicate the priority of those tickets. You can see that there's some key data shown on the card in a really compact way, the name, the ticket number, how long it's been in that status, when was the last time entry, how many hours have been logged on it, when the due date is, and so on. You get the same view for everybody. So both the managers are looking at this, the engineers are looking at this sort of view as well. And so there's no miscommunications because you've all got the exact same view of the data. And it's super flexible. So you can have any number of columns. These are all totally configurable. Give them any names that you want, any number of columns, and it can work with any sort of setup of your PSA data. I know that a lot of MSPs have put quite a bit of work into how they've set up their boards or queues and statuses and so on for their tickets. You've put a lot of work into those workflows. And Kanban is flexible and it can work with any way that you've set up that data. It doesn't need to be a whole huge initiative either. It doesn't need to impact your whole company. You can launch it from just one team if that's what you want to do. Let me show you how we do the swim lanes here, the lanes that I referenced, which we call swim lanes in the application. So this is an example of showing work by the technician. So in fact, we have here a swim lane at the top showing work that's not assigned to anybody, followed by a swim lane here for looks like Terry, swim lane here for Joseph, and so they're showing tickets that are assigned to each member. Makes it really very, very easy to see who might be ready to take on more work, who needs kind of a longer queue of data if you're doing the technician queue dispatch mode, or it can show you who is too busy because they have a lot of things in progress. For example, if you had one, you could easily see if somebody had just one thing in progress, which is what we would want to see, versus somebody who's got 8 or 9 things in progress. Big difference there. And you can use that knowledge to figure out how to do things better in your team. It helps you identify that neglected work. So you don't need to monitor any of this stuff or like run any special reports in ConnectWise or Autotask or anything like that. It actually just shows it to you right here in the interface. You can see things like when the SLA is coming due. This is a threshold that you can put in to determine when does this tag go orange to warn us that there's an SLA that's coming due. We better figure this, better emphasize this ticket because we're gonna miss this SLA if we don't do something on it right now. It can show this to you in red. If we've gone over the budget hours, same thing here, we can set this threshold to say, I wanna know when a ticket has been in progress for 3 days. Let's highlight this so that we see this in a special way compared to the other tickets that have only been in progress for minutes or hours or 1 or 2 days. So it makes it really easy from a manager's point of view to see what are some of the what are the tickets that need some extra attention right now, but also it allows the engineers to see it, right? They're using the same tool. And so it actually gives the engineers a lot more ability to also notice these problems and deal with them themselves even before the managers need to get involved. It also works with calendar dispatch. So here's a few screenshots. You can see here we have indicators about who's assigned to a ticket. A little border here indicates that this is someone's been assigned at a certain time and day. Blue if it's in the future. Let's say this is in the future. Hover over it to show you the date and time when that is when that person is assigned. Other indicators give you information about if it's green, that means it's today that that person is assigned, or red, it means that they're in the past. So that could have been a problem. Why were they were assigned to do this in the past, but either they didn't do it or maybe they did do it and they just didn't mark it as done. But it gives you something to follow up on and some notification that maybe something isn't quite right with this ticket and it needs some help to get done. Also allows you to create assignments that are in the calendar or in Autotask terms, make a service call. So you can actually pull up, begin to assign somebody. When you do that, it'll pull up their day, give them an indication of when they're free and when they're not free. So this person has something here from 3 to 4. Don't want to reassign them, double book them, but it's really easy. Just click a couple times here in this bar and it will set the dates and times to create that calendar entry or that service call in Autotask, and makes it really easy for all of those things where you do need to continue using the calendar. Here's an example of project work. So, I know we haven't really talked much about project work, but it's certainly something that a lot of MSPs are doing. And Kanban can help with that as well. So this is an example of a different sort of swim lane. So we're grouping the tickets not by who's assigned to the ticket, but by what project they're a part of. So we actually have a lane here for each project. makes it very easy to see at a glance a lot of information about what's going on with your projects, which specific tasks are started or waiting or scheduled or whatever. Same with your service work, but you see it exactly by your project, which is really useful, especially if you're um, in a smaller team where you're covering multiple roles. You're both doing service stuff and you're doing project stuff. It's going to really make a lot of your work a lot easier. Here's another feature, also something that's more for project managers, and we just released this in the past month or so. It's boards that are not showing you tickets anymore. These cards actually represent your projects overall. So this would be for a company who has like at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 projects, but I know that a lot of MSPs have way more projects, 20, 30, even 100 different projects ongoing at a time. And it's really hard to keep track of everything when you've got that many projects. But Kanban boards now can be used to show you the overall status of your projects in your project workflow, including the same sort of warnings for when it's gone, when the project is over budget, or when it's got an upcoming start date or end date. This one is actually an example of the swim lanes showing it by the start date. So you can see the difference between a week where you're only planning to start one project, which might be reasonable, versus a week or maybe you've made a mistake and you've accidentally scheduled 6 projects to start in that 1 week, and that's not that's not realistic for your team. But it makes it visual. Now you can see that, you can fix that. And so it allows you to improve your efficiency a lot as well. So with Kanban, from top left, you can reduce the clicks. All of this information is right in front of you on one Kanban board, or you can have as many Kanban boards as you want to show your information in different ways. And so it really reduces the number of clicks that you got to do in your PSA. You can show your project and service work together. That's just ConnectWise only for now. We do want to add that in the auto task, but that could be really useful for ConnectWise teams that do project and service work. You can see it all on the same board. Like I mentioned more than once, avoid miscommunications. You can also use Kanban to assign and unassign members. You can do that straight from the tool. You can dispatch the calendar, like I mentioned. You can enter time and notes. So since you can do this from the tool, it can mean that your engineers might actually do it. They won't have the tendency to save that up for the end of the day or the end of the week or whatever to enter those notes, because it's right there, just a couple clicks away. You can customize the card appearance. That's also something that for now is just for ConnectWise. We are going to be adding that to the auto task mode, but you can give your cards different styles, background colors, border colors, and so on, based on certain properties of the cards. Really customize it for your team to show you what's important. And also on ConnectWise, you can manage your sales opportunities on the boards, exact same thing. Again, something we'll add for auto task in the future. And in ConnectWise, you can also manage your activities on Kanban boards. So it's really flexible, gives you a lot of new tools for managing your work and visualizing things and becoming a lot more efficient, both in just clicking less because everything's right there, but in terms of not working on too much at a time. But you don't just have to take my word for it. Here's a message from a gal named Judy Baker. She's a service manager from Sitel Systems in Seattle. Used it for a long time. She says that she's absolutely seen improvement in her team, especially in the visibility of the work, which is what Kanban is all about. They have a call every morning to discuss the work. They use Kanban. They bring up Kanban boards, discuss their the work for the day. Very, very efficient. Things that they could not do unless they just with their PSA. In the 3 months that they've used the top left, they improved from 18 blocked tickets down to 11, 34 active tickets down, also down to 11. So big improvement in their work in progress, getting that down to a manageable level. So I'd love to show you this. If there's anything at all that you are thinking, you know what, we really need this, this could be a big step for us in finally being able to visualize our service work and manage it, and finally get on top of these things where we've felt chaotic or where we've it's just been taking up a lot of time for our dispatcher. So if you think that can solve this, or even if you just don't know, maybe I haven't answered your questions just yet, and you just want to get on a call to see to talk with us about how it can help you in your specific situation. Go here, topleft.team/schedule a call. We want to have a chat with you and answer all your questions and make sure that you understand what it can do. Also, we have a way to I want to say thanks for attending the webinar. And if you move fast on this, we have a promo for you. If you sign up for an annual plan by September 10th, then you can get 10% off your first year. So if you go to our website, you can see we have annual pricing and monthly pricing. The annual price obviously is a discount off the monthly price, but with 10% off of the annual price with this promo, it's already 30% off the regular monthly price. So that's a big savings. Also, we want to send you one of these books, Phoenix Project or Making Work Visible. These are really great books. We recommend them to everyone. They explain a lot about just some good practices, becoming more agile using Kanban, and Phoenix Project especially covers a lot of other good practices that you would want to be adopting in your IT environment too. So that brings us to basically to the end. Appreciate you sticking around this long. Again, go here, topleft.team/schedule call, and that brings me to the time for answering questions. So just let me pull up my questions box here, and I will see what questions we have, and begin answering those. Okay, we have a question from Sean. Can you share your daily case volumes, incidents versus service requests? Trying to understand scale. Yeah, good question. Boy, I really don't know if there would be any number that I would say is kind of a, we know that it handles up to a certain number of incidents or service requests at a time. Like in terms of what the technology will handle, and if you can kind of break the application with too much data, we're not aware of any maximum. Like we will make the application work and have made it work for basically any number of tickets from a technical standpoint. As far as just being manageable, in terms of being a tool for your humans and how much can this tool help with, I would say that we have a whole variety of ways that you can make the boards focused so that they're not overwhelming. So usually the first thing to do with that is, suppose you have a board that has 200 tickets on it, that's a lot. If those are all in just your regular board without swim lanes, then 100 to 200 tickets or more, that's pretty hard to deal with. But that's why we offer a lot. Well, first of all, we offer the swim lanes, which you've seen. There's a whole variety of ways to group those tickets, and not just like I've shown you the member swim lane. I also showed a quick view of the project swim lane and so on. But we have a lot of ways that we can do it. Like you can group by priority, you can group by company, you can group by the ticket owner if you use that as opposed to the who's assigned to the ticket and so on. So there's a lot of ways to group the tickets differently to make it manageable, even if you do have 100, 200 or more tickets on the board at once. The other thing is that we have a series of filters. It's actually very flexible, and I didn't get into the details about how this actually works, but in order, because we know that every MSP has their own way that all of their workflows are set up, the queues and Autotask, the different boards in ConnectWise, everybody has their own way to do that. So Kanban is really flexible, and there's a large number of different filters that you can use as you're building out these Kanban boards to kind of really very precisely select exactly which tickets you want to see on these boards. So you can have boards for very specific purposes. So in order to, like if you do have a large scale, you've got a lot of incidents, you've got a lot of service requests, then there's always going to be a way that you can kind of build out the boards in ways to make it not overwhelming, because Kanban is very flexible. So again, that's one of the things that we'd be very happy to show you the specifics of when you schedule a call there at topleft.team/schedule call. Another question here. Another question from Sean. Can you set flags per column with your solution? Yeah, so there's a number of things that you, a lot of our options are per column. So some of the flags there that I had mentioned were like, how long is it before we highlight a ticket as being neglected, like it's been in that status for too long. For example, it's been in the in progress column for 3 days, and that's too much. Well, like I mentioned, 3 days might be too much in the in progress column, but it would be totally fine when it's in the waiting column. You want to highlight that when you when it's been 10 days or 14 days or whatever. So those flags are available per column for sure. Other options as well, like I had referenced, at least in ConnectWise mode, we have the way where you can customize the appearance of the cards with background colors and borders and so on. That is also available per column for the same reason, because the columns frequently have different needs and different meanings and whatnot. So you can set out these profiles which define the rules that style these cards, and those are they're not available per board overall. They are available per column for that reason. Lois had a question. Show me how this works with ConnectWise. Kanban is on its own view, and then the technician can put in the dispatch portal for themselves. Yeah, Lois, that is it's really flexible actually. So if you do want to consider using continuing to use the dispatch portal, which certainly you can do, and sometimes you do need to do for a while, even if you're planning to move towards more sort of Kanban style dispatch procedures, it's not always practical to do that right away. Maybe you are going to continue using your calendar dispatch mode for a while. And Kanban can absolutely continue working with that, and then you still get the benefit of Kanban as a visualization tool to help you prevent tickets from getting forgotten about, and to be able to be notified when maybe somebody hasn't done work on a ticket at the time it was put in the calendar, things like that. So as I mentioned, all the data that you see on the in the Kanban board comes straight out of ConnectWise. So there's never any double entry. Anything that you do in ConnectWise is going to be reflected immediately in the Kanban boards, and any changes you make on the tickets in the Kanban boards is going to be immediately pushed back to the records in the PSA, whether that's ConnectWise or AutoTask. So there's never any double entry of data. If you use the dispatch portal in ConnectWise or the similar functionality in AutoTask, that's going to be reflected right away in the Kanban board. Same. Now, if you like the I did show a couple of screenshots there of the dispatch functionality in Kanban. And so if you go ahead and use that, and you set up a calendar, an assignment at a certain time in the calendar, or a service call in AutoTask, then you are going to see that in you're going to see that right away in ConnectWise, if that's where you're looking at the data, or in AutoTask. Now, as far as the workflows go, you can adopt that if you want or not. Like, there's a lot of flexibility. Kanban doesn't, despite that I've kind of taught how, what's a good way to do it, certainly everybody is going to customize that for themselves. So if you still do want a dispatcher to be dispatching work to the calendar, they can use Kanban for that. Now, if you do have a case where maybe you are using the Kanban methods, and an engineer has a ticket, and they, maybe they do some work on a ticket, and then they say, okay, all of the rest of the work on this ticket has to be done on site. So I'm gonna, arrange a time to be there. It's going to be tomorrow at 3 o'clock. So I want to put this in the calendar. So certainly the engineers can use that scheduling functionality in Kanban to do that themselves. That's no problem at all. So that's available both to managers, if you're using that for dispatching, or for the engineers, for them to use as well when they see that a ticket needs to be done needs to be in the calendar. You can also enter time and notes. I'm not sure if I think I mentioned that very briefly, but you can, both in ConnectWise mode and in AutoTask, for AutoTask customers, you can enter notes and time on tickets as well. So that's in addition to creating service calls and so on, you can also enter time and notes. So that you can do more on those tickets in Kanban and don't have to be going into your PSA all the time to do things. Now, I mean, there are certain things that functionality that we don't offer. We don't. You can't update every single thing about a ticket from Kanban. We're always building out more, but there's always going to be things that you can't do. And so in that case, if you do need to go back into your PSA, then you just click on the title in the card in ConnectWise in Kanban, and that's going to open up that ticket either in ConnectWise or Autotask. So if you do need to go back to get some functionality that's in your PSA, it's no problem. It's always just one click away. Sean has another question. Assuming that if you do an email to case in ConnectWise, it will automatically show on your board. Is that a fair assumption? Yes, Sean, absolutely. So like I mentioned, the data that you see on the board in the Kanban board is always coming out of ConnectWise or Autotask. And so I kind of very briefly alluded to how this works, but the Kanban boards are set up as a filter, viewing your it's very much like if you were to go into your PSA and set up a report and make a custom view where you set out the certain filters that you want to see, defining exactly what it is that you want to see in this report. It's very similar to that. So in ConnectWise mode, as an example, you can go in and one of the filters that you can select is for the ConnectWise board, since in ConnectWise, the board is one of the main ways that you would organize those tickets. Frequently incidents would be on a separate board. Stuff coming in from your RMM is going to be on a different board than your service tickets that have come from your email connector and things like that. So that's a filter. You can select as a filter for showing which tickets you want to see on the Kanban board. You can just select from your ConnectWise board. You can select one ConnectWise board. You can select 2 or 3 if you do want to have them mixed together. I mean, what I mean is if you have them separate in ConnectWise, but you do want to see them together in Kanban, you can do that. It's very, very flexible. Same thing with Autotask. Autotask queues are a key way to organize the data in Autotask. And so if you want to have a Kanban board that's only showing tickets from one queue in ConnectWise, you can totally do that. There's a filter for that. And you can select 1 queue, you can select 2 queues or more. It's very, very flexible. And all of that to say that because of the structure of how that works, the Kanban board is actually a kind of a filter or almost like a view in a custom report. That means that when a new ticket appears, because it's come in from the email connector or whatever, we're going to synchronize that right away. So we're going to get that copy from ConnectWise. So we're going to keep it in our own copy of the database, and then that's going to appear automatically on your board. So in fact, the boards kind of refresh automatically periodically. So if you just kind of keep a Kanban board open, keep that tab open in your browser, you can watch that throughout the day. And if you've got a lot of activity there, tickets changing every 30 seconds, every 60 seconds, or a couple of minutes, you're actually going to see tickets appearing on the Kanban board. Move it if you make a change. Even if you don't touch anything in Kanban, you're going to see things moving around on the Kanban board because we're getting those changes from your ConnectWise or Autotask, whether that's a new ticket, ticket changes status. If you do that from your PSA, then we still get that data. That could mean that the card moves from one column to another without even doing anything in Kanban. Same thing with closing off tickets. When a ticket goes completed, then it's going to, depending on how you've configured the board, it may just disappear from that board. Okay, let me take another look here, see if there's any questions I haven't answered. Okay, I think that actually is all the main questions answered. And so I just want to wrap it up. Again, thanks for attending. Really appreciate you giving us part of your day here. And be sure to contact us, topleft.team/schedule a call. If there's something that we can well, for any purpose, like you want to move forward with this, absolutely schedule that call. Or if you have any questions about it, then we absolutely want to answer those for you. And you can do that by scheduling that call. Appreciate your time. Back over to you, Jordan.
Thank you, Matt. An excellent presentation. To all of you, thank you for attending today's webinar. For those of you whose questions were not addressed, a member of the team will be reaching out to you personally. Thank you and have a great day. That does conclude today's webinar event.